All right, SDNN listeners, today is yet another episode of the pod Behind the Package. Once per week, I bring in a reporter, anchor, or a video journalist for a behind-the-scenes and deep dive informal chat. Joining me this week is our environment reporter, Tammy Murga. Hi, Tammy.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Welcome back. Thank you for making time. Thank you for being willing. How is everything?
Good, busy.
Yes, I'm sure.
It's been a busy month.
So this is a lovely two-part feature. Take me back to when you first became aware of this story.
This was interesting because I was really working on a story about a lawsuit here in San Diego. The city of San Diego sued the federal government for really alleging that they trespassed in city property and placed concertina wire to essentially, it's part of the federal government's bigger plan to close gaps in the border wall. Until they can actually put those steel barriers, they're putting a lot of concertina wire all along these, really around San Diego and all the neighboring states. And in that lawsuit, they said, well, in addition to trespassing, you're endangering precious resources there, natural habitats, endangered species. So that really got my attention. I said, well, what's here in the Maroon Valley? What endangered species? What kind of plants are we talking about? And in researching that, I came across this organization called the Wildlands Network. They've been doing a lot of this work in other states. They've been collecting a lot of data that looks at openings in the border wall in Arizona and Texas and New Mexico. There are these really, really small openings, like the size of a sheet of paper, in the steel wall. And I thought, well, maybe there's some here in California. I reached out, I emailed her, and she said, actually, no, there are none in California, and we're currently working on making that happen here. So I thought that's a story that's happening right now, and it's timely, of course, with the Trump administration's plan to close more gaps. And that just opened up this whole other, just larger question into what really happens with wildlife once you start closing those gaps. So, yeah, that really led me to a very cool place, very rural area between San Diego and Imperial Valley. And we even got on a plane. So I'm sure you'll want to ask and want to know more about that.
Yes, no, I want to know all of the different ways that you traveled to tell this story. I know we have some on foot. We have a plane. I know we have a VJ that traveled across the border. We want to get into all that. Talk to me about the barbed wire. Like, are they using the wire because it's like more affordable at the moment until they can put the steel? Or did they even talk about like how they first started using that wire?
It really seems like it's sort of like a temporary placement for now until the actual construction can start happening. And so they're really these large coils that they kind of stack them up. There's like, I think really at least the areas that we pass by, they're maybe 5 feet high. And it was really an astonishing view because as soon as the border wall ends, there's nothing there. Nature is what has served as that barrier. You have those like really huge rugged hills that really continue where the wall stops. But now when you go out there, you have these large coils that are really, I mean, I don't know how they place them. They really go for miles and miles really high. And that's what Border Patrol says is there to prevent humans from passing. But conservationists and scientists, wildlife biologists say, well, that is actually going to have an impact as well to wildlife because they don't see that as a impassable barrier. They're just going to try to go right through. They could get stuck, they could get injured, and possibly die. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, it was really quite the view to just see that stark contrast between the steel wall, the wire, and what really will later become something more permanent.
Yeah, and I like this story a lot because it's almost like an intersection of, obviously we do a decent amount of reporting here about border walls and the separation of people from their families and so on. But this also, while still acknowledging that, looks at animals. And obviously you're an environmental reporter. Talk to me about bighorn sheep and what are their numbers looking like? How much of a risk would this put on? And how much of a timeline would need to be put in place to put a couple temporary entrances to save their species? Like how at risk are these big horned sheep?
Well, they're already endangered. They're already considered endangered here in California. What's really interesting is there are many subgroups. One group lives by the border. And what this wall does really is it sort of ends up dividing resources. What biologists have told me is For the most part, a lot of the food is here in the U.S. Water sources are in Mexico, so they're often crossing by to get all of that. But when you you seal those gaps, this group starts to move further up north. And what they find over there is the freeway. There's already decreasing numbers of bighorn sheep in that area, another subgroup that lives near the Interstate 8 freeway between Ocotillo and Jacumba Hot Springs. And the data shows that there's about 2 to 3 bighorn sheep that die every year just off of vehicle collisions. And that is largely an undercount. So from 2012 since 2012, there's been about 30 bighorn sheep that have been tallied. And again, that's still very much underreported. So I think the worry here is that those numbers are going to increase because of migrations from, animals are going to look for more resources. If they can't cross, they're going to move farther up where they will potentially find these resources. But, I think it's something that really stuck with me is one of the environmentalists told me, well, these populations don't think, hey, we're decreasing in numbers, we have to reproduce, right? It's sort of like this. What do they call it? Sorry, let me think of it real quick.
Okay, take a second.
It's sort of become this battle between fences, the border wall and the highway. So I think it was just really interesting to see just how important these animals are, what they bring culturally, historically. This is a species with a lot of cultural history. They know, if you really get out there, you really look at the paths that they've created, and that just shows you they're constantly going there. They roam those areas all the time. That's what they know. If we close these gaps, if there's no compromise here, it's not like they can pull up their phone and say, hey, take me to the next nearest water source,
Exactly.
right?
It's not like I could put up the bighorn sheep this way sign.
Exactly.
And then they know.
Right, exactly. So that's something that you really get to see. It's really beautiful, really beautiful area, and you really start to appreciate the work that they're doing to try to preserve more of this population, this species.
Amazing, amazing. Tammy, you did a lot of hustling, a lot of traveling yourself for this story on the migration of animals and the risks that they're being put in. Talk to me about some of the travel involved when you covered this story, as well as your VJ, Matthew Bowler, traveling across the border into Mexico to cover. Talk to me a little bit about all the work on land, by air, maybe did he drive in? Talk to me about all the forms of travel that it took to make this shoot happen.
Definitely my little sedan couldn't have done this as much as I wanted it. But it really took a lot of coordination. Really, really grateful for all of the support that these biologists offered. They said, hey, we have some open seats in a plane. We're going to go get a different perspective of this area because we really want to point out where in this region are these gaps needed, and where on the highway should we build a crossing and fencing? So, it's so much different to see it on the ground than to see the whole picture up right from the sky. So, I'm so grateful that they had this open seat, and that really gave us as reporters to that perspective. And it was also a great opportunity to get really good video and photography from that too. We cover this region a lot, even just as environmental reporters in this region with so many other issues. It's just so good to get that view. But yes, aside from the plane, we also wanted to make sure we had good wheels to get us through this really rugged and rural area. And that also involved going to Mexico. We really wanted to get a complete story. We wanted to get voices from both sides because, as we know, we were just talking about, animals don't know barriers, right? This whole area is one continuous habitat. And from the sky, you really see just this line on the sand, per se, of this border wall. And to have us get a tour guide from someone in the Autonomous University of Baja California to show us where these water sources are was just amazing, really, really amazing. And to learn about how much they also appreciate bighorn sheep, what they've done. And that also really showed us that a lot of that work has happened more south of the state in Baja California. And now with the border wall construction, they're sort of starting to shift those efforts up north. And they're coordinating between Mexico and the U.S. To try to get more data. I think data really is the way to show, hey, these animals really depend on resources on our other side. Here's the proof. There's already a lot of camera footage, like I mentioned, in other states that show mountain lions trying to squeeze, literally snaking through these really tiny picture-sized openings. But there are animals like turkey that can't pass through. Bears, even, you'd be surprised. Bears in that region as well that are not able to. So the more data, the better. And I think for us to really be able to tell this story and break it down, we had to be there, right? And that required all views from the sky, from the ground. It was really important for us to do that on either side. And we're, again, really grateful that we got that opportunity.
Yeah, no, it's very impressive journalism. I love the travel aspect. Save the animals, of course, right? But I just really like the visuals that you provided, and there are multiple animals being put at risk, but bighorn sheep are the ones that are already in danger. The numbers are already low, but it also affects multiple animals, which I think speaks volumes. And I like that you use the word habitat, because it almost shows that this is an animal's habitat while also being a border between two different countries.
Exactly.
And that have to find a way, hopefully, to work together to fix this, right?
Definitely.
Talk to me a little bit about the difference in focus in journalism between part one of your story and part two.
I thought this is one of those where you have so much material. You're like, oh my gosh, how do I put this together? How do I really condense this and make it digestible for viewers and listeners? So we thought 2 parts. It has to be 2 parts because really there are 2 efforts happening here. One of them, as I mentioned, right, is the border wall effort. We really wanted to take kind of our audience through that trajectory the same way that we did. We started really looking at what's happening at the border and those efforts to get those openings there. And what happens, as we mentioned, right, these animals are projected to make the trek up north toward the freeway. So part 2 really focuses on the dangers that these animals face with really fast vehicles. I mean, you have to stand there along the road to really just see how fast cars pass by. And again, animals don't have that sense of like, okay, it's safe for me to cross now, right? So you see that. And so part 1, again, focuses on that starting point and what is divided with the wall between both countries, and what could potentially happen is when they make their way up there. So I hope that makes it pretty clear for audiences to kind of take them along the route that we took as well.
Absolutely, and I invite you once again to visit both parts 1 and 2 on our KPBS website. A CBP spokesperson did get back to you, and they said they're working to find small locations for small wildlife openings, quote, within existing border wall construction. Is there any exact timeline on that right now? Is there any, there's usually a proposal that's coming or something like that. What are like the exact next steps on that?
Sure. Well, the opening period for public comment just closed. That's why a lot of these conservationists, scientists have been rushing to collect signatures and comments and show support and data because this time period just closed last month. So there isn't a specific timeline for when, CBP may put this in. I don't think we've asked, but they didn't provide those details. But I think it's something that a lot of these groups are really consistently pushing and advocating for and showing, hey, we have the data. We can show you where. Take us along the ride. And I think that's something that hopefully we'll be able to see. And maybe, I don't know, it would be awesome if we could get down there and see them make these openings. But in terms of timeline, I mean, I think these things take time. But at the same time, this administration has been waiving a lot of environmental regulations to expedite a lot of this construction. So who knows? Maybe they could come sooner than we think.
Talk to me about some of the scientists and people you interviewed helped to tell this story.
Sure. So one of the main characters in the sources in the story is Christina Aiello, and she's the one that I first connected with for this story. She's a wildlife biologist for the Wildlands Network, and she is just a wealth of knowledge. I mean, in our story, we have audio from the plane ride, and she is just narrating to us this entire terrain, what's there, why it's so important to preserve these animals. So I really appreciated her knowledge of this topic. And I think, she's one of the main characters. She also took us on the ground. We were hiking with her, and she was telling us, why these efforts are really important. And there was a really cool moment where, we were all really trying to find some bighorn. Sometimes you get lucky, sometimes you don't. And then this particular day that we went, we didn't, but we found a lot of fresh tracks and droppings even. So it's just like all of these little moments that she was able to guide us through was really great. And another really important voice in our story was, one moment, I'm skipping his name right now. Okay. Another really great voice in the story is Fraser Schilling. He is with the Road Ecology Center with UC Davis. And this group is really spearheading this project to create wildlife crossings on the Interstate 8. And really cool, on their website, you can find all sorts of data that shows where animals have been struck, deer, bighorn sheep. For our project, we really focus, of course, on bighorn sheep, and they've been collecting really when animals have been struck on this hotspot on Interstate 8, how old they were, what was the impact of the vehicle. In some cases, they have been fatal as well. So I think these are folks that are really tracking these things that, maybe not a lot of us may think about when we're just, vacationing, traveling by these freeways or flying over the border. So yeah, a really, really great group of scientists and also residents who live in that area and are constantly hiking in the area, and they really respect the habitat and are super knowledgeable where to find them and where to keep their distance and stuff, and just really appreciate the importance of preserving these species.
Yeah, no, I love it. As an East Coaster, born East Coaster, I have nothing to compare this to. Like I think about every once in a while, you'll see like a deer. That's about as deep animal as it gets for us out there. It's like you'll see a deer, he'll have a bum leg, or you'll see a deer that's stuck in some fencing. There's plenty of viral videos of people cutting around to let them get out. They usually end up hurting themselves immediately again because they're in so much shock and spooked, and who knows how long they were there. So to hear about other species, especially one already endangered, I think it's super, super cool. And that was one of my favorite points where you kind of said you were in the plane with her. You guys are hundreds of feet above it, and she's able to narrate part of that valley to let you know this is the part of the terrain they'll travel. This is a skinnier part. It just shows that level of expertise and someone who is really owning that area.
It was like being in a live documentary almost. You're looking at it, you're right above, and you have this like great person just narrating everything to you.
The Wildlife Crossing project still needs about $30 million in funds for construction costs. Any update on that? And do you plan to check in with them down the line, maybe 6 months from now, the same way we can track the age or the size or the impact of the animal that was hurt? Can we also keep a line in on this $30 million with the Wildlife Crossing project?
Yeah, absolutely. As I mentioned, this is a hot spot here in California, so I think it's really important for us to track, can they make this project cross the finish line per se, right? I think there's a lot of, I don't know if competition is the right word, but there's a big need for these animal crossings all over California and really all over the nation. So I think a lot of these groups are hoping to find any sources of funding to make it happen. So we absolutely will be asking them and following along.
Any details or any additional POV you'd like to share that didn't make it into your final piece?
That's a good question. Yeah, I mean, I think there were a lot of really cool data. We put snippets of it, sometimes because of time purposes, but there's a lot of really cool footage that we didn't really make it into the story fully. The variety of all of these animals that really are able to make that prove the point that these openings pass by. But if anybody checks out also the Wildlands Network, they have really cool data up that you can look at a lot of this
like a full
monitoring.
list of the animals.
Yeah, there's just like really cool footage of them passing through and the ones that do and don't make it, and it's a really cool perspective.
And this is completely unrelated. I didn't write this question down. Completely non-researched, full disclosure.
Freestyle.
Yeah, freestyle. Can they like set up like water? You said on the U.S. side they're getting water, I believe, and on the Mexico side they're getting food. would that be considered? I know they do things sometimes with animals where they feel like it takes their wildness away, like, don't feed the coyotes, don't feed them because they'll come looking next week. But is there any plans for that, or is it strictly just about controlling and keeping their migration routes the same?
No, that's a great question. I'm glad you brought it up because they actually are trying to get more sources of water on this end because as they have acknowledged and we put it in our story, stopping the closure of the wall is not going to happen. And they've accepted that. So what is a way what are some options to help these animals, find the sources that they may miss on the other side of the border? So I think water barriers, natural, man-made, are some ways that they're looking to kind of make them available for them. So yeah, that's totally part of their efforts.
Yeah, because I feel like a watering hole would be really cool. Like the Tammy Murga environmental watering hole or something.
Yeah.
Some sort of get some sponsors behind it.
Exactly.
And
we should
we
get
just
out.
gave away a bunch of water because our reserves were too full from the rain we had. I'm like, that water.
We'll have a ribbon cutting.
Valley. That could go to Tammy Murga with us once again on Pod Behind the Package. Thank you for your time, Tammy.
Thank you for having me.